Welcome to the Fantasy Football Wire podcast with your host, The Prophet.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Fantasy Football Wire podcast with your host, The Prophet, or Calvin Wright, whatever you want to call me these days. I bought myself a soundboard, so we got a fun little intro going on. That was a nice purchase I made. I'm going to be doing a lot more YouTube streaming, a lot more YouTube videos. I'll talk about that in this episode. This is the 2022 NFL Draft, my fantasy football wish list for this draft, but I'm also going to talk a little bit about the whole rebrand because a lot of people were confused. Why do you rebrand? Why are you doing a rebrand? Your page, it's doing fine. You don't need it. Well, I'm going to talk about that. So before we get into the fantasy football wish list, I have changed the name of the podcast and the whole page from The Prophet Podcast, as you all know, to the Fantasy Football Wire podcast, and your host, The Prophet. So I'm keeping The Prophet in the name a little bit, but I made the decision because I'm going to be pursuing YouTube a lot more than TikTok. YouTube and the podcast are the primary focus for 2022 for a lot of reasons. Partially money. I can no longer promote Prize Picks, the sponsor of this podcast, like I want to be able to on TikTok due to community guidelines. And YouTube just seems like, I don't know, the content on YouTube is longer. The podcast is what I like to do. Longer form content is what I enjoy a lot more than short form content. So I'm going to be focusing on that a bit more. I'm going to try to stream every single day during the fantasy football season and a few times each week during the off season. So that is why we're changing. And the name change comes as an impact of that, because on YouTube you have to have fantasy football in the name to get found. It just, you need to work in much more of the SEO, search engine optimization stuff on YouTube other than TikTok, because you don't have that algorithm which boosts you and you can go viral. It doesn't work that way. So it's sad to see the name The Prophet go, and The Prophet Podcast, I love saying that, The Prophet Pod. It just rolled off the tongue. But the Fantasy Football Wire is what this is now with your host, The Prophet. So I'm still The Prophet. I'm still The Prophet. Don't worry. It's not all is lost. I hope you enjoy how the stream looks if you're watching on YouTube. There might be a few little glitches here and there. Maybe the lighting isn't perfect. I haven't seen what it looks like. I can't see until a few hours later. I hope it sounds and looks good, though. I know the audio sounds good for the podcast, but if you want, you can go watch that on YouTube. And I encourage you all to subscribe to the YouTube channel, The Fantasy Football Wire, and leave a review if you're listening on the podcast. Anyways, let's get into the fantasy football. I decided to make this because a lot of people have, rankings and their prospects guides, and I'm not going to do that because we're a fantasy football page. I talk about players once they're drafted into their situation and we know concrete where they are and can talk about the situation. Oh, I'm expecting goal line volume. I can't do that until a player is on a team. But what I can do is tell you what I don't want to have happen and what some situations that I don't want during the draft. So this podcast is about my fantasy football 2022 NFL Draft wish list. I'll try to revise the title because that's a mouthful. Okay, number one thing that I want in this NFL Draft is I do not want the Broncos to draft another running back. I do not want that. I want that very much. Javonte Williams is an incredible running back. He is an incredible running back. We saw it last year. He was forcing missed tackles left and right. His balance is ridiculous. He can catch. He has good speed. He's a true workhorse running back, his talent. However, it did not translate into prolific fantasy scoring because Melvin Gordon was there. Melvin Gordon looks like he is out of the picture. They have not signed a new running back in free agency. So as of right now, it's Javonte Williams' backfield. He's the only guy there. That's incredible. Seems too perfect. And that's what I'm scared of. I want so badly the Broncos to not draft a running back in the first, 3-4 rounds. But I think they might. their offensive coordinator, he's coming or across from Green Bay, where the Packers have utilized a tandem for a long time. It was Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams, and then Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. This is a situation where I could see them picking up another running back in the draft, in which case Javonte Williams falls from my running back 5 right now in preseason rankings down to like my running back 9. He goes from a really solid RB1 with RB overall 1 potential and upside and ceiling to a lower end RB1, possible RB2, depending on how this offense works out. So that is something that I really do not want. That is probably number 1 on my wish list. Number 2, I wish for Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker to get drafted to situations that will let them start and let them be owned in fantasy football. Because I keep thinking of places where they could go, and I keep seeing them drafted, both of them, especially Walker. I keep seeing Walker mock drafted to the Buffalo Bills, which would be a nightmare. Because Kenneth Walker, in the NFL, I want that. I want to own that on my fantasy team. He is such a great running back, and I think he will have such a great career. But there's so many situations, so many backfields right now that are not great fits because you don't have a clear understanding of what the workload would be. And the Bills are one of those. We've got Devin Singletary, who by the end of last season was looking good, and right now we're saying, okay, when you're in that running back dead zone, maybe you take a shot on Singletary, maybe he pans out into an RB2. If Kenneth Walker's there, suddenly Devin Singletary in fantasy football is dead, officially, deceased. But also, he's good enough in real life that Kenneth Walker will not just be, handed the reins and he's going to be 3 downs every down running back. That won't happen because Devin Singletary is a pretty good running back. And I really don't want Kenneth Walker or Breece Hall to land in a situation where there's another running back who's competitive and will take snaps away. Now, there will be other running backs. It's the NFL. But I'm talking about, I've seen Breece Hall mock drafted to the Raiders, where he'd have to compete with Josh Jacobs. I think he's better than Josh Jacobs, but you cannot convince me Josh Jacobs wouldn't be involved. It would destroy everyone fantasy football-wise. And in a world where there's so few really good fantasy football running backs who have really solid workloads, I don't want these two to come in and destroy someone's value while getting their potential destroyed as well. All right. Number 2, I really want the Packers to draft a wide receiver early on. I think they will, but I really, really want that because I play in a lot of keeper leagues and dynasty leagues, and I want that wide receiver on my team. Look, Aaron Rodgers is in line to get a new wide receiver 1. This doesn't happen often. It was Jordy Nelson for my childhood, and then Davante Adams for my teen years, and now that I'm about to become 20 years old, he's got to get a new wide receiver 1. Who's it going to be? There are a lot of guys it could be. Chris Olave is one that I really like in mock drafts going to the Packers. But I just really hope that they don't wait till round 2 and get someone who's lesser. I want them to get one of these elite talents who I am confident will come in week 1 and be a difference maker. Aaron Rodgers, wide receiver 1, is always good in fantasy football. Always. I don't care if they're going to be a rookie. If they can get Chris Olave or Treylon Burks, they will be the wide receiver 1 in Green Bay, and they'll be prolific in fantasy football. And that excites me about a rookie that I can get in a keeper league and hold on to for the next several years. So that is my 3rd wish. But I wish that for a lot of these wide receivers at the same time. Because I talked about Aaron Rodgers. Patrick Mahomes is also in line to get a new wide receiver 1. I don't think it's going to be Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Spoiler alert. I'm sorry if I offended any Scantling truthers out there. But Patrick Mahomes, one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, possibly the best quarterback in the NFL, he's about to get a new wide receiver 1. And there are a lot of great talents who are great fits in Kansas City. And I just hope these teams that need these wide receivers don't try to get cute and draft cornerbacks or linebackers and then wait till round 2 and 3 to scoop up wide receivers. I want them to get the wide receivers early on so we know night 1 who the wide receiver 1 is for Patrick Mahomes, who it is for Aaron Rodgers, and we can start making our rankings and getting excited. So that is one thing that I dearly wish for all these wide receivers. And then I think the last thing really on my fantasy football wish list is I want the Saints to get a new quarterback. I want the Saints to get a new quarterback. Why? Because I want Alvin Kamara to succeed. And Jameis Winston coming off a torn ACL is not a recipe for success for that offense. I really don't think it is. And I know there are not a lot of incredible prospects, but there's some pretty good ones. I've seen Malik Willis mock drafted there. I like that, a runner. And I think having a running quarterback or a fantasy-relevant quarterback, running, they would become fantasy-relevant early on, but a newer young quarterback to help that offense become electric once again. It's been a while since we've really seen the Saints be electric. Probably 3 years ago, Michael Thomas was dominating. Alvin Kamara was, week in, week out, the number 1 running back. I want that to return again. So I really want the Saints to go after a new quarterback. And honestly, I want them to go after a wide receiver too. I want them to go after a wide receiver. I want the Saints to be good. Fantasy football is better when the Saints are good. If you've been playing fantasy football for a long time, you know that is true. You know that fantasy football is more fun when the Saints are dominant because their running backs are good, their wide receivers, quarterbacks, it all trickles down. Heck, their tight ends are usually good. Taysom Hill. Does he count? I don't know. But that is one more thing that is on my fantasy football wish list. This one was short. It's only about a 10-minute podcast. I really made this just to get some thoughts out there before the draft and to explain the rebrand to you all firsthand so you don't see it somewhere else. And I wanted to just also say how excited I am for the 2022 NFL season. The Fantasy Football Wire, there's a lot of big things that will be coming. Daily fantasy football streams, live phone calls, answering your guys' questions during the season and during your drafts. I'm going to have people call in. I'm going to answer who they should draft live on air on YouTube. So I'm very excited for that, and I'm very thankful for the support that I've received during this whole rebrand and changing of the style of content and names. A lot of people were mad that I'm changing that name, but a lot of people said, hey, new logo's awesome. I like the new name. And that was really awesome to see how many people were going to continue supporting this through this change. All right. Without further ado, I want to remind you all, make sure you drop a review wherever you are listening. And if you're not already, subscribe to the YouTube because I will be doing a lot of stuff on there. So thank you all for listening to this very short little mini episode of the Fantasy Football Wire podcast. It's going to take a while to get used to saying. And as always, I will see you next time. I think I know how to end the stream.